There are moments in life when everything you've built, every achievement, every carefully constructed wall around your heart, crumbles in an instant. For Everett Hawthorne, that moment came on a warm summer evening, at a rooftop gallery where the jazz floated soft and the city lights glittered like fallen stars. Everett wasn't supposed to be there. The CEO of a multimillion-dollar empire, he'd spent years at black-tie corporate galas where champagne flowed and conversations stayed surface level, safe, controlled. But tonight, something pulled him to this charity art exhibition, a celebration of local black artists in the heart of the city. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was fate, or maybe, deep down, some part of him was searching for something he'd lost a long time ago. He stepped onto the terrace, adjusting his designer suit, feeling immediately out of place among the vibrant crowd. String lights crisscrossed overhead, casting warm glows on faces of every shade and background. Caribbean spices drifted through the air. Laughter, genuine, unguarded laughter, echoed around him. This wasn't his world. These weren't his people. Here, success wasn't measured in stock portfolios or quarterly earnings. It was measured in connection, in community, in something he'd forgotten how to value. And that's when he saw her. Across the crowd, surrounded by children painting bubbles on canvas, stood Zora Caldwell, his ex-wife, the woman he'd once promised forever, the woman he'd let slip away while chasing the next promotion, the next deal, the next empty victory. Time stopped, the jazz faded, the laughter dulled to a distant hum. All Everett could see was her, radiant in a summer dress, her natural hair framing a face that still haunted his dreams. She knelt beside two children, guiding their small hands across paper, her smile as warm as he remembered. That smile that used to be his. That smile he'd taken for granted until it was gone. But it wasn't just Zora that froze him in place. It was the children, Zahara and Malik, his children, 8 and 5 now, growing up in a world he'd abandoned. He watched Malik's tiny fingers grip a paintbrush, watched Zahara throw her head back in delight at something her mother said, and something inside Everett shattered. How long had it been? 2 years since he'd seen them in person. 2 years of missed birthdays and forgotten school plays. 2 years of telling himself he was building something for them while he was actually just running away from the wreckage of his failed marriage. He wanted to look away. God, he wanted to turn around and leave before she noticed him. But he couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stand there like a ghost haunting the edges of a life that used to be his. The contrast struck him like a physical blow. Zora moved through the crowd with effortless grace, greeting old friends, her laugh rich and free. She belonged here in a way he never could. She'd always had that. Roots, community, people who knew her not for what she'd accomplished but for who she was. He'd envied that once, resented it even. While she had Sunday dinners and church gatherings and neighbors who felt like family, he'd had conference calls and expense reports and colleagues who'd forget his name the moment he left the company. Now, watching her thrive in this warm, living, breathing community, he realized what he'd truly lost. It wasn't just a wife. It wasn't just his children. It was the possibility of being part of something real. Everett forced himself to move, to drift through the gallery like he belonged. Each painting on the walls seemed to mock him, vibrant portraits of mothers and children, heritage scenes bursting with color and life, abstracts that somehow captured more truth than any spreadsheet he'd ever studied. Art had always been Zora's language, not his. She tried to teach him once, in those early days when love felt infinite and possible. He'd been too busy, always too busy, and then he saw it, a large canvas dominating the far wall. Roots and Wings by Zora Caldwell. His feet carried him forward without conscious thought. The painting showed a strong black woman, unmistakably Zora, leaning down to embrace 2 laughing children against a backdrop of a golden cityscape. The children's faces radiated pure joy, pure love, pure everything he'd walked away from. He read the placard beneath with trembling hands. After the divorce, Zora had returned to painting. She'd channeled her heartbreak, her love for their children, her resilience into her art. While he'd been drowning in quarterly reports, She'd been creating beauty from pain. While he'd been building an empire, she'd been building a life. The realization hit him like a freight train. She didn't need him. She'd grieved, rebuilt, and emerged stronger. The life he'd thought would collapse without him had flourished. And he, the great Everett Hawthorne, master of boardrooms and balance sheets, he was the one who'd been left broken. But here's what terrified him most. Standing in front of that painting, surrounded by the ghost of what could have been, Everett felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not regret, he'd felt that plenty. Not guilt, that had been his constant companion. No, what he felt was hope. Dangerous, irrational, impossible hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. He turned, heart pounding, searching the crowd for her again. And when their eyes met across the gallery, when he saw the flash of recognition followed by something that looked like pain, he knew what he had to do. So here's the question. When you've destroyed the most precious thing in your life, when you've chosen ambition over love and lost everything that mattered, can you ever really earn your way back? Or are some mistakes simply too big to forgive? Everett Hawthorne had made billion-dollar decisions without breaking a sweat. He'd stared down hostile takeovers, navigated corporate warfare, closed deals that would make lesser men crumble. But walking across that rooftop gallery toward his ex-wife, toward the woman whose heart he'd broken and the children he'd abandoned, that required more courage than anything he'd ever done in his entire life. Each step felt like moving through concrete. The jazz music seemed to grow louder, the conversations around him more intense, as if the entire universe was conspiring to amplify this single moment of reckoning. He could turn back. He could slip out through the crowd, pretend he'd never seen them, go back to his empty penthouse and his empty life and pretend everything was fine. But something in him had shifted. Something had broken open when he saw that painting, when he saw the life Zora had built without him, and there was no going back to the comfortable numbness he'd wrapped himself in for the past 2 years. Zora. His voice came out quieter than he intended, almost a whisper, but she heard it. Of course she heard it. She turned, and for a split second, just the briefest flash, he saw something raw and unguarded in her dark eyes. Surprise, pain, maybe even a flicker of the love they'd once shared. But then her walls went up, that protective armor she'd learned to wear, and her arms instinctively found their children, pulling them closer. Everett. The way she said his name, cool, controlled, laced with years of hurt, told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't going to be easy. Hell, this might not even be possible. But he was here now, and there was no turning back. The children continued playing, oblivious to the earthquake happening between their parents. Malik chased bubbles across the gallery floor, his laughter pure and innocent. Zahara examined a sculpture nearby, her fingers tracing its curves with the same artistic curiosity her mother possessed. They had no idea that the stranger in the expensive suit watching them with barely concealed emotion was their father. The man who was supposed to tuck them in at night. The man who was supposed to teach them to ride bikes and help with homework and show up. Always show up. But Everett Hawthorne had never been good at showing up. Not when it mattered. Not when his family needed him most. The music shifted to something slower, more melancholic, as if the universe itself was scoring this painful reunion. Around them, other guests laughed and mingled, completely unaware of the drama unfolding in their midst. That's the thing about heartbreak. It always feels apocalyptic to those experiencing it, while the world just keeps spinning, indifferent to your pain. I didn't expect to see you here, Everett managed, hating how corporate he sounded, how stiff, like he was opening a business meeting instead of trying to bridge a chasm 2 years wide. Zora's expression didn't soften. This is my community, Everett. My world. I didn't expect to see you here either. There was an emphasis on that last word that cut deeper than any knife. This wasn't his world. He'd made that clear years ago when he chose boardrooms over family dinners, when he chose late nights at the office over bedtime stories, when he chose everything except them. He needed to say something. Anything. But the words caught in his throat, tangled up with regret and shame and a desperate, clawing need to make her understand that he'd changed, that he'd spent 2 years drowning in the emptiness of his success, realizing too late that he'd won the wrong game. Your painting, he started, grasping for something, anything to keep her from walking away. The one over there. Roots and wings. It's Zora, it's beautiful. For the first time, her expression shifted slightly. Not quite softening, but something. A crack in the armor. Art had always been her language, her soul made visible, and he was finally acknowledging it. "Thank you," she said quietly, and for a moment, they just stood there. Two people who'd once known every inch of each other's hearts. Now strangers separated by mistakes and time and words left unsaid. "And the kids?" Everett continued, his voice cracking despite his best efforts to maintain composure. "They're growing up so fast. Zahara looks just like you. And Malik." He had to stop, emotion threatening to choke him. "Malik has your smile." Something flickered across Zora's face. Pain, maybe, or recognition that this man, this stranger in an expensive suit, still noticed the little things about their children. Still cared even if he'd been absent. But caring wasn't enough, was it? Love without presence is just a pretty word that means nothing when your kids ask why daddy never comes to their recitals, their games, their lives. "They wanted to come tonight," Zora said, her voice softer now but still guarded. "Zahara and Malik painted at home, so they'd have something to show at the exhibition." She paused, studying him with those eyes that used to look at him with such love, such trust. "They're proud of their art. I've taught them that creativity matters, that expressing yourself matters, that showing up for the things you care about matters." Every word was a carefully aimed arrow, and Everett felt each one hit its mark. She wasn't just talking about the kid's artwork. She was talking about him, about all the times he hadn't shown up, all the times he'd chosen a conference call over a school play, a business trip over a birthday party, a promotion over his marriage. And then it happened, the moment that would haunt Everett for the rest of his life. Malik, sweet, innocent Malik, tugged on his mother's dress, his small face scrunched up in curiosity. "Mom," he whispered, loud enough for Everett to hear. "Who's that man by the painting?" Time stopped, again. But this time it wasn't wonder that froze Everett in place. It was devastation, pure, absolute devastation. His 5-year-old son didn't recognize him. His own flesh and blood, the boy who carried his DNA, who had his grandfather's eyes, who used to cry when Everett left for work in the mornings. That boy looked at him like he was just another stranger at a crowded party. Zora glanced at Everett, and in that glance he saw everything. The lonely nights she'd comforted crying children who wanted their daddy. The birthday parties she'd navigated solo, making excuses for why he wasn't there. The questions she'd had to answer. When is daddy coming home? Does daddy still love us? While she tried to hide her own heartbreak behind a brave smile. "That's just a guest, sweetie," Zora said gently, her hand stroking Malik's hair with a tenderness that made Everett's chest feel like it was caving in. "Just a guest. Not your father. Not the man who was supposed to be there every day, every moment, every time you needed him. Just a guest. A stranger. Someone passing through." Everett felt something break inside him that he didn't even know could break anymore. He'd thought he'd hit rock bottom during the divorce. He'd thought those first nights alone in his penthouse, surrounded by all the trappings of success while his family packed up and left, were the lowest he could sink. But this was a new kind of hell. This was the consequence of his choices staring him in the face with innocent 5-year-old eyes that didn't know him. But here's the thing about rock bottom that no one tells you. Sometimes you have to hit it before you can finally start climbing back up. Sometimes you have to feel the full weight of what you've lost before you can truly understand what you need to fight for. "Zora," Everett said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk? Please, just for a few minutes." She studied him for a long moment, and he could see the war happening behind her eyes. Part of her wanted to protect herself, to keep those walls up, to walk away and preserve the peace she'd worked so hard to build. But another part, maybe the part that still wore the silver heart necklace he'd given her on their anniversary, the one he could see glinting at her throat, that part was curious, cautious, wondering if maybe, just maybe, this time could be different. 5 minutes, she finally said. "Let me get the kids settled with Miss Patterson." She's been watching them tonight. Everett nodded, not trusting his voice. He watched as Zora led Zahara and Malik to an older woman across the gallery, watched her kneel down to explain something to them, watched the easy affection between them. This was her village, her community, the safety net she'd built when he'd pulled his away. While he waited, Everett found himself drawn back to her painting. Roots and wings. He understood it now in a way he hadn't before. The roots were what Zora had given their children. Stability, love, culture, community, a sense of belonging. The wings were the freedom to grow, to dream, to become whoever they wanted to be. She'd given them everything that mattered. Everything he'd been too blind to see. What had he given them? Money, sure. The child support checks arrived on time every month. But money can't hold you when you're scared at night. Money can't teach you how to tie your shoes or read your favorite bedtime story or show up at your soccer game in the pouring rain just because you promised you'd be there. Money was the easy part. Presence was what mattered. And presence was exactly what Everett had failed to give. All right. Zora's voice came from behind him. 5 minutes. They stepped away from the crowd, finding a quieter corner of the terrace where the music was softer and the city lights spread out before them like a blanket of stars fallen to earth. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 2 years of absence and all the words they'd never said. Everett had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his head. He'd planned what he'd say, how he'd explain, how he'd make her understand. But now, standing here with her, all those carefully crafted speeches evaporated. All he had left was the truth, raw and unvarnished and painful. "I've been selfish," he started, the words tumbling out before he could second-guess them. "God, Zora, I've been so selfish. I convinced myself that building the company, making more money, climbing higher, I thought I was doing it for us. For you and the kids. I told myself I was securing our future." He laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the gentle night air. "But that was a lie. I was doing it for me, for my ego, for some twisted need to prove something to a world that doesn't actually care. I kept chasing the next deal, the next promotion, the next whatever, and I told myself it would make everything better. That one day I'd arrive at some magical destination where I'd finally be successful enough to relax, to focus on family, to be present." Zora watched him silently, her expression unreadable, and Everett forced himself to continue. To say all the things he should have said 2 years ago or 4 years ago, or back when they first started drifting apart and he was too proud and too blind to admit there was a problem. But that day never came, did it? Because there is no destination. There's just an endless ladder. And I was so busy climbing I didn't notice I was leaving you and the kids behind. I didn't notice until you were gone, until the house was empty, until I came home to silence instead of Malik's laughter and Zahara's questions about why the sky is blue. His voice cracked, and he didn't try to hide it. Didn't try to maintain the polished corporate facade he'd worn for so long. What was the point? She'd already seen him at his worst. She'd already watched him choose work over their marriage 100 times. There was no hiding anymore. "I see now, God, Zora. I see now what I lost. And the worst part is I didn't just lose you. I lost them. I lost 2 years of Malik learning to read, of Zahara discovering art, of bedtime stories and scraped knees and all those tiny moments that make up a life. I lost it all because I was too arrogant to admit that maybe, just maybe, I already had everything I needed." Zora's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she remained silent, letting him speak. And maybe that was its own kind of mercy, giving him the space to finally say what needed to be said. "I missed Zahara's 8th birthday," Everett continued, his own tears threatening now. "I missed it, Zora. My little girl turned 8, and I sent a present and a card, and I told myself that was enough. But it wasn't enough. Nothing I've done has been enough because I haven't been there. I haven't shown up. And tonight, when Malik asked who I was, he had to stop, had to take a shuddering breath before he could continue. When he asked who I was, I realized I've become exactly what I always feared. A ghost. A memory. A stranger in an expensive suit who sends checks but doesn't know his own children's favorite colors, or what stories they like or what makes them laugh. The silence that followed felt infinite. Somewhere behind them, the party continued. Laughter and music and life moving forward without pause. But here, in this quiet corner, time seemed suspended, waiting to see what would happen next. "Why now, Everett?" Zora finally asked, her voice soft but edged with something sharp, something that sounded like pain wrapped in armor. "Why tonight? After 2 years of nothing. You've had my number. You've known where we live. You could have come by any time, could have asked to see the kids, could have tried. So why show up at my art exhibition, at my community event, after all this time?" It was a fair question. More than fair. It was the question he'd been asking himself since the moment he saw her across the gallery. "I don't know," he admitted, and the honesty of it seemed to surprise them both. "I mean, I came tonight because I was invited, because someone at the company thought I should show my face at community events. Corporate image and all that." He laughed bitterly. "But that's not really why I'm here, is it? I'm here because for the past 2 years, I've been walking through my life like a zombie, going through the motions, making more money, closing more deals, and feeling absolutely nothing." He turned to face her fully, meeting her eyes even though it hurt to see the pain there, the wariness, the wall she'd built to protect herself from him. "I'm here because I'm lonely, Zora. Not alone. I'm surrounded by people all day, every day, but lonely in a way that has nothing to do with company and everything to do with connection. I'm lonely because I destroyed the only real connection I ever had. I'm here because I saw you across that gallery, saw you with our kids, saw how happy you all looked, and I realized that you did it. You built a life, a real life, while I was building an empire that means absolutely nothing. Is that supposed to make me feel sorry for you?" Zora asked, and there was an edge to her voice now. "You want sympathy because you're lonely in your penthouse? Because your success feels empty? Everett, I've been lonely too. I was lonely in our marriage, raising 2 kids while you were always somewhere else. I was lonely during the divorce, trying to explain to Zahara why Daddy wasn't coming home anymore. I was lonely rebuilding my entire life from scratch while you got to keep your career and your freedom and your sense of self." Her words hit like physical blows, each one true, each one deserved. "But you know what?" she continued, her voice strengthening. "I'm not lonely anymore. I have my art. I have my community. I have 2 beautiful children who know they are loved, who know they can count on me, who know that no matter what happens, I will always, always show up. So don't come to me now, after everything, talking about how lonely you are. Your loneliness is a consequence of your choices. Mine was a necessity I had to overcome." Everett absorbed her words, let them sink in, let them cut where they needed to cut. She was right. Of course she was right. His pain didn't erase hers. His regret didn't undo the damage. Acknowledging his mistakes didn't automatically earn him forgiveness. But here's the thing about being at rock bottom: you have nothing left to lose. No pride left to protect. No image left to maintain. Just raw, ugly truth and the faint, desperate hope that truth might be enough to start building something real. "You're absolutely right," Everett said quietly. "Everything you just said, you're right. I don't deserve your sympathy. I don't deserve anything from you. But Zora, I'm not here asking you to feel sorry for me. I'm here asking, no, I'm here begging, for a chance. Not for us, not yet, maybe not ever. But a chance to be a father to Zahara and Malik. A chance to show them that even though I've been absent, even though I've failed them in every way that matters, I want to try. I want to learn their favorite colors and their favorite stories. I want to show up at their school plays and their soccer games. I want to be there, really there, in a way I never was before." He could see the conflict in her eyes, the war between hope and self-preservation, between the love she'd once had for him and the scars his absence had left. "And if that's all I ever get," he continued, "if I can just be a present father to our children and nothing more, that will be enough. That will be more than I deserve." Zora looked away, out at the city lights, and Everett could see her mind working, weighing his words against his history, his promises against his track record. "You don't get to just show up and fix everything with pretty words, Everett," she said finally. You don't get to miss 2 years and then waltz back in acting like you've had some grand epiphany and expect everything to be okay. I know, he said. I know that. I'm not expecting anything to be okay. I'm asking for a chance to try, to prove that I've changed, to show you and the kids that I'm capable of being better than I was. Before Zora could respond, a small voice interrupted them. Mommy! They both turned to find Malik standing a few feet away, his small face scrunched up in confusion, holding a paintbrush in his tiny hand. Behind him, Miss Patterson looked apologetic, mouthing, "I'm sorry," to Zora. "What is it, baby?" Zora asked, instantly shifting into mother mode, her voice warm and reassuring even as her eyes remained troubled. "Miss Patterson said I could paint some more, but I wanted to ask you first," Malik said. Then his eyes shifted to Everett with that same innocent curiosity. "And I wanted to know if the nice man wants to paint with me." The nice man, not his father, not even someone he recognized. Just a nice man at a party who looked sad and maybe needed a friend. Everett felt his heart crack wide open. But before he could respond, before he could figure out how to explain to this 5-year-old boy that he was so much more than a nice man at a party, Zahara appeared beside her brother, her 8-year-old eyes much more observant, much more cautious. "Mama," she said quietly, "who is he, really?" And there it was, the moment of truth. Zora looked at Everett, and in that look he saw a decision being made. A choice that would determine everything that came next. "This is..." Zora started, then paused, seeming to gather herself. "This is your father, babies. This is your daddy." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Malik's eyes went wide, his little mouth forming an O of surprise. Zahara's expression shifted through several emotions. Confusion, recognition, something that might have been anger, and finally a careful, guarded hope. "Daddy," Malik repeated as if testing the word. "The daddy from the pictures?" "Yes," Zora said softly, kneeling down to be at their level. "The daddy from the pictures." Malik looked at Everett with new eyes, studying him with that intense focus children have when they're trying to make sense of something that doesn't quite fit their understanding of the world. "Why haven't you been coming to see us?" It was such a simple question, such an honest question, and it deserved an honest answer, even if that answer was painful and inadequate and couldn't possibly make up for 2 years of absence. Everett knelt down too, bringing himself to their level, looking his children in the eyes for the first time in 2 years. "Because," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I made a very big mistake. I thought work was more important than being with you and your mommy. And I was wrong. I was so wrong." Zahara crossed her arms, a gesture so reminiscent of her mother it almost made Everett smile despite the gravity of the moment. "That's what mommy always says, that you chose work instead of us." The words were like a knife to the chest, but Everett didn't flinch. He deserved this. Deserved worse, probably. "Your mommy is right, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Are you going to leave again?" Malik asked, his voice small and vulnerable in a way that absolutely destroyed Everett. This was the moment, the question that mattered more than any business deal, any contract, any merger or acquisition he'd ever negotiated. "Are you going to leave again? Are you serious this time? Can we trust you?" "No," Everett said firmly, looking first at Malik, then at Zahara, then up at Zora. "No, I'm not going to leave again. I'm going to be here. I'm going to show up. And if I mess up, because I probably will mess up sometimes, I'm going to keep trying. Because you're my kids, and I love you. And nothing is more important than that." Malik seemed to consider this for a moment, his little face serious. Then, with the quick forgiveness that only children possess, he held out his paintbrush. "Okay, do you want to paint bubbles with me?" It was such a simple offer, such a small thing, but to Everett it felt like a lifeline being thrown to a drowning man. "Yes," he said, his voice cracking. "Yes, I would love to paint bubbles with you." They moved back into the gallery, to a table set up with paper and paints and brushes. Malik immediately began showing Everett how to make the perfect bubble. Not too much paint, gentle pressure, circular motions. He was so earnest, so eager to teach, and Everett found himself completely captivated. Zahara hung back, watching, still uncertain. She was older, more aware of the hurt, more conscious of what his absence had meant. She wouldn't be won over with paint and promises. She would need time, proof, consistent, unwavering presence. But then, slowly, cautiously, she picked up a brush. "I'll show you how to make the bubbles look 3D, she said, not quite looking at him. "It's harder, but it looks better." "I'd like that," Everett said softly. "I'd like to learn." And so they painted, the three of them creating something together for the first time in years. It wasn't perfect. Everett's bubbles were lopsided and his color choices questionable. But it was real. It was present. It was showing up. From across the gallery, Zora watched them, her hand unconsciously touching that silver heart necklace at her throat. She'd told herself she'd moved on. She'd built a life without him. She was strong and independent and didn't need Everett Hawthorne to be whole. But watching him with their children, seeing the genuine emotion in his eyes, the careful attention he paid to every word they said, the way his hands trembled slightly as he painted alongside them, she felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet. Maybe not ever in the way he hoped. But something. A tiny crack in the walls she'd built. A whisper of possibility that maybe, just maybe, people could change. The painting session went on longer than Everett expected. Malik was a chatterbox, full of stories about school and friends and the frog he'd found in their backyard. Zahara was quieter but warmed up gradually, showing him her technique, explaining her artistic choices, revealing glimpses of the person she was becoming without him. Every moment felt precious. Every laugh, every shared smile, every casual touch of small hands against his. It was all treasure to a man who'd spent 2 years in a self-imposed exile from the only things that truly mattered. Eventually, Zora approached, 2 glasses of lemonade in hand. She offered one to Everett silently, and he took it, their fingers brushing for just a moment. The contact sent electricity through him, a reminder of all they'd been, all they'd lost, all they might possibly find again if he could prove himself worthy. "The party's winding down," she said quietly. "We should probably get the kids home soon. It's past their bedtime." Everett nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. He wasn't ready for this to end. Wasn't ready to go back to his empty penthouse and his empty life. But he also knew he couldn't push. Couldn't demand more than she was willing to give. This evening was already more than he deserved. "Zora," he said as she started to turn away. She paused, waiting. "Thank you. For this. For letting me." He couldn't finish, emotion choking his words. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression complex and unreadable. "Don't thank me yet, Everett. This was one evening. One conversation. One painting session. That doesn't erase 2 years. That doesn't guarantee anything." "I know," he said. "I know. But it's a start. And if a start is all I get, then I'll take it." Something flickered across her face. Maybe respect, maybe just exhaustion. "The kids have a soccer game this Saturday. Malik's team. 10 a.m. at Jefferson Park." She paused, then added almost challengingly. "You could come. If you want." If he wanted. It was like being offered oxygen after drowning. "Yes," he said immediately. "Yes, I'll be there. I promise." "We'll see," Zora said. And there was a lifetime of broken promises in those 2 words. A history of him swearing he'd be at this event or that dinner, only to call at the last minute with some excuse about work, about meetings, about things that seemed urgent but were really just him running away from intimacy, from vulnerability, from the terrifying responsibility of being truly present for the people he loved. But this time would be different. This time had to be different, because Everett had finally learned what every workaholic learns too late. That success means nothing when you have no one to share it with, that money is a poor substitute for meaning, and that the most important deals you'll ever make aren't in boardrooms but in messy, complicated, beautiful human connections. As the night deepened and the gallery slowly emptied, Everett found himself on the terrace again, looking out at the city lights and trying to process everything that had happened. He'd come to this event expecting nothing more than an obligation, a corporate duty to fulfill. Instead, he'd been given something he'd thought was lost forever. A chance. Not a guarantee. Not forgiveness. Not even acceptance, really. Just a chance. An opportunity to prove that people can change, that mistakes don't have to be permanent, that love, if it was real to begin with, might survive even the worst betrayals. Behind him, he could hear Zora gathering the children, could hear Malik's sleepy protests and Zahara's questions about when they'd see the nice. No, when they'd see their daddy again. The word still felt foreign in reference to him, like a title he hadn't earned and didn't deserve. But maybe, if he worked hard enough, if he showed up consistently enough, if he loved them loudly enough through his actions instead of just his words, maybe one day he'd be worthy of it. The rooftop door opened, and Zora emerged, Malik on her hip and Zahara holding her hand. She paused when she saw Everett standing there, silhouetted against the city lights, and for just a moment her expression softened. "Everett," she said quietly. "The kids wanted to say good night." He turned, and despite his earlier composure, felt his eyes well up again at the sight of them. His family, his almost lost, might still be lost, desperately prayed for family. "Good night, Daddy," Malik mumbled sleepily, already half asleep against his mother's shoulder. "Good night," Zahara said more formally, still cautious but not quite as guarded as before. "Good night," Everett managed, his voice thick. "Sleep well. Dream big. And He looked at Zora, seeking permission. She gave the smallest nod. "I'll see you Saturday. At the soccer game. I promise." "Okay," Malik murmured. Zahara just nodded, her 8-year-old eyes searching his face for something. Truth, maybe. Reliability. Proof that this time would be different. And then they were gone, disappearing through the door and out of the gallery, leaving Everett alone on the terrace with nothing but the night sky and his thoughts and the ghost of all his regrets. He stood there for a long time after they left, thinking about the road ahead, about how showing up to one soccer game wouldn't erase 2 years of absence, about how painting bubbles for one evening wouldn't rebuild trust that had been systematically demolished, about how sorry, no matter how genuine, couldn't undo hurt. But maybe, and this was the thought that kept him rooted to that terrace, staring at the stars, maybe consistency could. Maybe showing up again and again and again, even when it was inconvenient, even when work demanded his attention, even when the ghost of his old life tried to pull him back into familiar patterns. Maybe that could start to heal what he'd broken. Saturday at 10 a.m. Jefferson Park. A children's soccer game that probably wouldn't be very good, with kids who could barely kick straight and parents who'd cheer too loudly. It was the furthest thing from a board meeting or a corporate gala or any of the places Everett Hawthorne used to measure his worth. And it was exactly where he needed to be. But here's the question that would keep him awake for the next 4 nights. What happens when you get the second chance you've been desperately praying for? When the door you thought was permanently closed cracks open just slightly? Do you have what it takes to be a different person than you were? To choose differently when faced with the same temptations? Or will you prove everyone right who said people don't really change, they just promise to? Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp, clear sunlight that makes promises feel possible. Everett Hawthorne woke at 5 a.m., not because an alarm pulled him from sleep, but because anticipation had kept him tossing and turning all night. In his hand was his phone, the calendar reminder glowing accusingly. Malik's soccer game, Jefferson Park, 10 a.m. He'd set 3 alarms, asked his assistant to call him, and even written it on a physical sticky note attached to his bathroom mirror. Because this time, missing wasn't an option. This time, showing up meant everything. But here's what terrified him as he stood in his closet, trying to figure out what a father wears to a children's soccer game. What if showing up once wasn't enough? What if he arrived and Malik didn't even acknowledge him? What if Zora took one look at him and regretted giving him this chance? What if he'd burned bridges so thoroughly that no amount of presence could rebuild them? He settled on jeans and a casual button-down, a uniform so foreign to him it felt like a costume. The CEO, who normally wore $1,000 suits, now stood in front of the mirror looking like any other suburban dad heading to a weekend game. Except he wasn't any other dad. He was the dad who'd missed 2 years. The dad who had to earn back what should have been his birthright. The drive to Jefferson Park felt eternal. Every red light seemed designed to test his patience, every mile marker a reminder of how far he drifted from this life. He arrived 45 minutes early, parking his luxury sedan among the minivans and SUVs of families who'd been doing this every weekend, who knew which snacks to bring and which other parents to chat with and whose turn it was to bring orange slices for halftime. Everett sat in his car, watching families arrive, watching fathers ruffle their sons' hair, and mothers adjust shin guards and siblings chase each other across the grass. This was the world he'd abandoned. Not a glamorous world. Not a world that would make headlines or impress colleagues. Just a simple, beautiful world where showing up mattered more than closing deals. And then he saw them. Zora's car pulled into the lot, and even from a distance, he could see Malik's excited face pressed against the window, his small hands waving at teammates already warming up. Zahara sat beside him, more composed but equally attentive, her artistic eye probably already cataloging the colors and movements and emotions of the scene. Everett took a deep breath and stepped out of his car. This was it. The moment where words became actions, where promises met reality, where the man he'd been confronted the man he claimed he wanted to be. Zora saw him first. Their eyes met across the parking lot, and he watched her expression shift through surprise. Maybe she hadn't actually believed he'd come, to something more guarded. She said something to the kids, and both their heads whipped around to look at him. Malik's face lit up with unfiltered joy, but Zahara's expression remained more reserved, more watchful. "You came?" Malik shouted, already running toward him in his oversized soccer uniform, his cleats clacking against the pavement. "I came," Everett confirmed, kneeling down to catch his son as he barreled into him with the full force of 5-year-old enthusiasm. The hug nearly knocked him over, and he had to blink back tears at the simple, pure acceptance in that embrace. Kids, he realized, were far more forgiving than they had any right to be. "Did you see my jersey?" Malik asked, pulling back to show off the number 7 on his chest. "I'm a midfielder. That means I run a lot." "It's perfect," Everett said, his voice thick. "You look like a professional." Zahara approached more slowly, with Zora just behind her. "Hi, Daddy," she said, and though her tone was cautious, the fact that she'd used the word at all felt like a gift. "Hi, sweetheart," Everett replied, standing to his full height. "Are you playing too?" "No, I don't like sports," Zahara said matter-of-factly. "But I bring my sketchbook and draw the game. Mama says I'm documenting family memories." Family memories. The words hit him with unexpected force. Was he part of those memories now? Could he be? Or would he always be the footnote, the asterisk, the man who showed up too late? "I'd love to see your sketches later," Everett said. "If you want to share them." Zahara considered this, then nodded once. "Maybe, if they turn out good." Zora finally spoke, her voice carefully neutral. "There's a good spot on the sidelines where parents usually watch. You're welcome to join us." The us felt significant, a boundary being drawn, a reminder that he was being allowed in, not automatically included. They walked together toward the field, and Everett noticed the looks from other parents. Some curious, some welcoming, some judgmental as they probably wondered who the stranger was and why he'd never been to a game before. Zora seemed to sense his discomfort because she quietly said, "Most of them know about the divorce. They'll assume you're a weekend dad. Let them assume." A weekend dad. It was more credit than he deserved, but he accepted the olive branch gratefully. The game was chaos. Beautiful, messy, hilarious chaos. Kids ran in the wrong direction, tripped over their own feet, kicked the ball wildly with no apparent strategy. Malik was one of the smallest on his team, but what he lacked in size he made up for in enthusiasm, chasing the ball with determined abandon even when he had no hope of reaching it. "Go, Malik!" Everett found himself shouting, surprising himself with the volume and emotion in his voice. "That's it, buddy. Keep running." Next to him, Zora smiled slightly. Not at him exactly, but at the scene, at their son playing, at the normalcy of it all, at this moment that she'd experienced dozens of times, but that was brand new for Everett. "He's not very good yet," she said quietly, but there was pride in her voice. "But he loves it, and his coach says he has heart." Heart. Everett thought about that word, about how success in his world was measured in talent and skill and ruthless efficiency. But here, in this world of childhood soccer games and muddy knees, heart was what mattered. Showing up, trying hard, caring about the team more than personal glory. Maybe there was a lesson in that for him too. Halftime came, and the kids swarmed the sidelines for juice boxes and orange slices. Malik ran straight to Everett, his face flushed and happy. "Did you see? I almost scored." Almost was generous. He'd kicked the ball roughly in the direction of the goal before a defender easily intercepted. But Everett wouldn't have corrected him for anything in the world. "You were amazing," he said honestly. "The way you didn't give up. The way you kept chasing the ball. I'm so proud of you." Malik beamed, and in that moment, Everett understood something fundamental. Being a father wasn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts or providing material comfort. It was about this, being present for the mundane moments, celebrating the almost goals, showing up when showing up was inconvenient. The second half of the game brought rain. Light at first, then heavier, turning the field into a muddy slip and slide. Other parents groaned and pulled out umbrellas, but the kids loved it, sliding through puddles and emerging covered in mud and grass stains. "Should we call it?" one coach suggested, but the kids protested so loudly that the game continued. Everett found himself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in months as he watched Malik slip and fall, then pop back up with a mud-streaked face and continue playing. Next to him, Zahara was rapidly sketching the scene, her pencil capturing the motion and joy with surprising skill for an 8-year-old. "You're really talented," Everett said, looking over her shoulder at the drawing. "Mama teaches me," Zahara replied, not looking up from her work. "She says art is how we remember the important things." There was a weight to those words, a suggestion that maybe she was trying to decide if this moment, this game, this day, this version of her father was important enough to remember. When the final whistle blew, Malik's team had lost 3-2, but no one seemed to care. The kids celebrated like they'd won the championship, and Malik ran off the field directly into Everett's arms, transferring mud and grass and pure joy onto his formerly pristine clothes. "Did you see my assist?" Malik asked breathlessly. "I passed to Tommy and he almost scored." "I saw everything," Everett said, and he meant it. He'd seen every kick, every run, every moment of his son's game. He'd been present, fully, completely present, in a way he couldn't remember being for anything in years. As parents and kids began packing up, heading toward cars and post-game celebrations at local pizza joints, Everett felt a familiar panic rising. Was this it? Would this be the end of the day, with Zora and the kids driving away and him returning to his empty penthouse until the next scheduled visitation? But then Zora surprised him. "We usually go to Sal's Pizza after games," she said, her voice carefully casual. "It's a tradition. The kids love it. You could come. If you want." If he wanted, there was nothing in the world he wanted more. "I'd love that," he said, perhaps too quickly, too eagerly. But he didn't care. Pride had gotten him nowhere. Vulnerability might actually get him somewhere real. Sal's Pizza was exactly the kind of place Everett would have dismissed in his previous life. Crowded, loud, with sticky tables and fluorescent lights. But watching Malik and Zahara argue over toppings, seeing Zora laugh at something the waitress said, being part of the simple, ordinary, perfect moment, it was worth more than every 5-star restaurant he'd ever dined at. They squeezed into a booth, Malik insisting on sitting next to Everett, pressing his small body against his father's side, like he was afraid Everett might disappear if he didn't maintain physical contact. Zahara sat across from them next to Zora, still watching, still assessing, but slowly warming. Over pizza and soda they talked, really talked. Not the superficial conversations Everett was used to, not the networking small talk or corporate strategizing, but real conversation. Malik told elaborate stories about his friends at school, his words tumbling over each other in his excitement. Zahara showed them her sketchbook, page after page of remarkably perceptive drawings documenting her world. And Zora watched it all with an expression that Everett couldn't quite read. Not happiness, not exactly. Maybe hope. Maybe fear that this moment couldn't last, that it was too fragile to trust. When the check came, Everett reached for it immediately, but Zora's hand stopped him. "We split it," she said firmly. "This isn't you buying access to your kids. This is us being a family, even if it's a complicated family. A complicated family. Not his family returning to him. Not forgiveness earned with a credit card. But a complicated family that might, possibly, with time and effort and consistent presence, become something real." He nodded and pulled back, letting her pay her half, understanding that she needed this. Needed to maintain her independence. Needed to prove that she didn't need his money or his grand gestures. She needed his presence. That was all. That was everything. As they left the restaurant, Malik grabbed Everett's hand on one side and Zora's on the other, swinging between them like kids do, like this was normal, like they were a family who did this every weekend. Zahara walked beside them, her sketchbook tucked under her arm, and for just a moment, one perfect, impossible moment, they looked like any other family finishing up a Saturday afternoon. The parking lot brought reality back. 2 cars, 2 separate destinations. The reminder that this was still fragile, still conditional, still dependent on Everett proving himself worthy. "Thank you," he said to Zora as Malik reluctantly released his hand. "For today. For the chance. For—" He gestured helplessly, unable to articulate the enormity of what this day had meant. "It's one day, Everett," Zora said, but her voice was softer than it had been, less guarded. "One game. One pizza." "I know," he said, "but it's a start. And I promise, I swear, I'll be at the next game, and the one after that, and every single one I possibly can." She studied him for a long moment, and he could see her weighing his words against his history, his promises against his track record. Finally, she said, "Malik has practice on Tuesday evenings, 5:30 p.m. at the community center. If you wanted to take him, I could use the time to finish a painting commission." It was a test. He understood that. Show up on a random Tuesday evening, interrupt whatever important meeting might be scheduled. Prove that this wasn't just weekend enthusiasm but real commitment. "I'll be there," he said. "I'll pick him up from your place at 5:15. That'll give us time to get there." Something flickered in Zora's eyes. Maybe surprise, maybe the tiniest spark of respect. "Okay," she said simply. Tuesday. Malik hugged him goodbye with the unselfconscious affection only children possess. "See you Tuesday, Daddy," he said, his voice muffled against Everett's chest. Zahara offered a more reserved goodbye, but she did hug him, briefly, and whispered, "The sketches I did today, I'll show you the finished ones next time. If there is a next time." "There will be," Everett promised. "There absolutely will be." He watched them drive away, standing in that parking lot long after their car disappeared from sight, feeling simultaneously more full and more terrified than he'd felt in years. Because now he had something to lose again. Now he had people counting on him. Now he had a second chance that could still be destroyed by one mispractice, one broken promise, one moment of falling back into old patterns. The drive home was different than the drive there. The city looked the same, the roads unchanged, but Everett felt fundamentally altered. He'd spent years climbing a ladder that led nowhere, chasing a version of success that left him hollow. Today, covered in mud from his son's hug and full of cheap pizza and the sound of his children's laughter, he felt richer than any quarterly earnings report had ever made him. But here's the truth about second chances that no one tells you. They're terrifying. Because getting something back means you can lose it again. Because proving you've changed once doesn't mean you've changed permanently. Because old habits whisper seductively that one mispractice won't matter. That work sometimes has to come first. That surely they'll understand if something important comes up. Monday morning arrived with an email marked urgent from his VP of operations. Major client crisis. Emergency board meeting scheduled for Tuesday at 5 p.m. His presence absolutely required. The kind of meeting that, in his old life, would have taken precedence over everything else without question. Everett stared at that email for a long time, his finger hovering over the reply button. This was it. The first real test. The moment where he had to choose between the life he'd built and the life he wanted to rebuild. He thought about Malik's face when he'd said, "See you Tuesday, Daddy." He thought about Zora's guarded hope, her willingness to give him this chance despite every reason not to. He thought about Zahara's careful, "If there is a next time." And he typed, "I have a prior commitment on Tuesday evening that cannot be rescheduled. Please move the board meeting to Wednesday morning, or I can participate via video conference. But I will not be available in person Tuesday evening." His hand shook slightly as he hit send. In his old life, this would have been unthinkable. The client came first. The board came first. Everything came first except the things that actually mattered. Tuesday evening, he stood outside Zora's apartment at exactly 5:15 p.m., his heart pounding with an anxiety no boardroom had ever inspired. When she opened the door, Malik already waiting with his soccer bag. She looked surprised. "You came," she said, and he heard the unspoken part. "You actually came, you didn't make excuses, you didn't let work take priority." "I promised," he said simply. Something shifted in her expression. Walls coming down by degrees so small they were barely perceptible, but they were coming down. "He's been talking about it all day," she said quietly. "About how his daddy is taking him to practice." His daddy. Not Everett or your father, but his daddy. Claimed. Owned. Loved. The practice was mundane. Kids kicking balls, running drills, the coach shouting encouragement. Everett sat on the sidelines with other parents, making small talk about weather and weekend plans, and it was possibly the most meaningful 90 minutes he'd spent in years. When he returned Malik to Zora's apartment afterward, she invited him in, just for a moment, just to see Zahara's finished sketches from the soccer game. The apartment was small but filled with art and color and life. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator. Books overflowed from shelves. It was everything his sterile penthouse wasn't. Zahara showed him her sketches, and they were remarkable. Not just technically skilled for her age, but emotionally resonant. She'd captured Malik's joy, Zora's watchful hope, and in one drawing, Everett's face. His expression a mix of wonder and grief and desperate love. "This is how you looked," Zahara explained, pointing to the drawing. "Like you were sad and happy at the same time." "That's exactly how I felt," Everett admitted. "How I still feel. Sad for all the time I missed, but happy to be here now." She nodded, satisfied with his honesty. "Mama says that being sad about the past is okay as long as you don't let it stop you from being good in the present." Wise words from a woman who'd had to rebuild herself from the wreckage he'd left behind. Weeks turned into months, and Everett kept showing up. Not perfectly. There were scheduling conflicts, days when work genuinely did require his presence, moments when the old patterns tried to reassert themselves. But he showed up more than he missed. He learned Malik's teammates' names and Zahara's favorite art supplies. He started keeping a calendar just for the kids, games, practices, art shows, school events. And slowly, incrementally, things shifted. Malik started calling him without prompting, just to tell him about his day. Zahara began texting him pictures of her artwork, seeking his opinion, trusting him with her creative process. And Zora started looking at him differently. Not with the guarded caution of those first weeks, but with something that might possibly eventually become trust again. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were hard conversations about past hurt, about broken promises, about scars that wouldn't heal overnight. There were moments when Zora's walls went back up, when Zahara pulled away, when Malik asked why he hadn't been there before if he could be there now. But here's what Everett learned. Showing up is a practice, not a destination. Being present is a choice you make every single day, not a box you check once and consider complete. Love, real love, the kind that sustains families and builds futures, isn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It's about Tuesday evening practices and Saturday morning games and saying no to urgent meetings because your kids are more urgent. 6 months after that first soccer game, Zora asked him to dinner. Not with the kids, just the two of them. And over wine and candlelight and the weight of everything they'd been through, she said something that changed everything. "I see you trying, Everett. Really trying. And I think," she paused, choosing her words carefully, I think maybe we could try too. Not rushing into anything. Not pretending the past didn't happen. But maybe trying to build something new. And Everett, the man who'd once measured his worth in deals closed and profits earned, felt his eyes fill with tears. Because this moment of possibility, this chance to rebuild what he'd destroyed, this woman's willingness to risk her heart again, this was the only success that had ever really mattered. "I'd like that," he said. "I'd like that more than anything." Under the city lights, in a restaurant far simpler than the ones he used to frequent, Everett Hawthorne finally understood what it meant to be rich. Not in money or power or corporate achievements, but in the things that actually counted, in second chances and soccer games and children's laughter and the possibility of rebuilding love from the ruins of past mistakes. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Forgiveness isn't linear. Trust has to be earned repeatedly. Families aren't fixed with presence alone. They require patience and work and the humility to acknowledge when you're wrong. But for the first time in years, Everett had something worth working for. Not a promotion or a merger or a bigger office with a better view. He had a complicated, messy, beautiful family that was willing to let him try again. And that was worth more than any empire he could have ever built. So here's my question for you, and I really want you to think about this. When was the last time you chose presence over productivity? When did you last say no to something urgent to say yes to something important? Because here's the truth Everett learned the hard way. Success means nothing if you're successful alone. Ambition is empty if you have no one to share it with. And all the money in the world can't buy back the moments you missed while you were too busy chasing the next achievement. Drop a comment below and tell me. What's one thing you need to show up for more consistently? What's that relationship, that commitment, that person you've been putting on hold while you chase the next deadline? Because Everett's story isn't just his story. It's a mirror asking us all whether we're building empires or building lives. And I want to know, which one are you choosing? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if the story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own priorities, hit that like button and subscribe, because we're building a community here of people who believe that the most important successes happen outside the boardroom. Let's choose presence over profit, connection over climbing, and love over ladder. I'll see you in the next story.